process with this series where, you know, obviously most photographs of people, you want to see the faces, that's where you see the engagement. Whereas this is, I'm obviously making a statement of people waiting within shadows.
I wanted to talk to you also about we spoke about David Goldblatt before, who is a South African photographer, and I do this, it's just something I've come up with from trying to define photographers myself, that if Goldblatt, he once said he was a photographer who photographed apartheid, and he's still photographing, he's like 85 or something now, but he said, "It was to the quiet and commonplace, where nothing happened, and yet all was contained and imminent, that I was most drawn." And I always think of him like in one end of this spectrum, and then at the other end I think of the Bang Bang Club, you know, and that was a group of photographers who they photographed violence and in the townships when apartheid fell through and broke down, and it's like the images are so violent you can still hardly watch them. And then they are at the end of the spectrum. But when I thought about your images, looking through all of them, even the ones that you have taken before all of your earlier projects, I had to, for the first time, like place you on the other side of Goldblatt. It's like you bring an even more stillness to your own images. Do you know what I mean? There was still, it was this that everything is contained in these images, there's a story, but there's even more stillness in the images. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, like I mentioned earlier, I don't tend to find myself very interested in photography that's like uber emotional and that is supposed to take the viewer into a specific emotional mood very quickly. And so I think from that sort of rejection of that type of photography, that kind of like, this is very sad, this is very troubling, these people are in pain, you know, or this person's very happy and this is an amazing story. I guess there is a stillness that happens because I get people maybe in between, it's very like contemplative. I'm hoping through that sort of, that moment that I capture, or the images that I decide to use within my bodies of work, maybe people can feel like they have more space to fill in the blanks themselves and to think, God, is this guy's life hard, or is he just having a cigarette? Is it like, is he just done a serious day's work, or is, you know, is he depressed? You know, there's that sort of more of a space for questioning of the viewer with that work. I don't want to be so didactic in terms of like, this is what's happening, feel guilty, feel sad, feel empathy, because I don't like photography that does that to me. I guess when I think about what I was studying and what I was looking at as a student, it was the work of photographers who left me with more questions than answers that I was most moved by.
So
and
this has always been your feeling, this is what you've always have had to do. Do you think, have you ever felt that the photographic world, I mean editors or any other kind of people, have they wanted something? What does the business want more feelings, or perhaps it's in a different, it's like more the newspapers?
Yeah, I think sadly a lot of photojournalism and documentary work is used, even if you have, you know, I can go off for 2 weeks on assignment, which is sort of rare nowadays, and still my imagery would be used alongside the writer's text as illustrations to that text.
Okay.
And for me this was really problematic, and it's more and more the reason why I've kind of moved away from that space. And I still do assignments and I still work with some writers that I really admire and kind of create stories for certain publications, but we really try and have ownership on that work as much as possible. But when you pass it on to the picture editor, you don't have any control, you lose that control. So yeah, I think a lot of imagery that's being used within sort of media spaces is very, very obvious and can sometimes only be there to illustrate what's going on in the text. And I think that's a great disservice to both the viewers, the photographers, the subjects in these projects. and sometimes it's very basic and emotional and, you know, dramatic.
That's a conflict that has been going on forever and ever, and I think the one that you mentioned now between the written text and the photography. And I think that photographers have had to work rather hard for being seen as having their own language and presenting their own language, not only to be illustrating some text. And is it still like that? Do you avoid working with writing people, or do you prefer to work on your own?
No, I mean, pretty much all of my projects, apart from this one, I've worked with writers at some point for them to bring context. I think text is super important.
Yes. But do you like choose, you know these people?
Sure, yeah. I mean, Tales from the City of Gold, I worked with a journalist who already worked within that sort of environmental fallout from mining in South Africa. For other publications, we worked closely together for like 4 months. I then worked with a translator to translate that text. For Cairo Divided, I worked with a writer for 6 months who I've gone on to collaborate with many other projects with. So, no, I think, you know, there's a huge amount that needs to be put forward with some of my ideas, because some of my ideas look at that bigger picture, framing so much that sometimes only through text will that really come across. And they also bring other narratives and other voices. And actually, I mean, this is, I feel like, a good point to talk about with this body of work. The book only comes with images and the time period. It's sort of formatted around like a calendar format. So you just sort of see this, you just see the images and then the length of time. But for me, to sort of reiterate the idea that waiting is much more universal, I commissioned 4 writers to respond to different themes of waiting from both South Africa and the UK, and to create that link between the UK, because this was a co-published book with UK and South African publishers. So in the website, which we're actually in now, we made this standalone website so that everybody could view the work. You then have the 4 essays. There we go. So you've got 4 different, very different creative types of text. You've got both fiction and non-fiction, in terms of Paul Goodwin talking about young men waiting for jobs in suburbs, and then you've got Mungandi, who's written this incredible piece on the idea of being part of the revolutionary forces in the ANC and waiting for different moments in time. So that's over a sort of prolonged period of time. And you've got waiting in a waiting room for a doctor's appointment by Francesca Beard. So I sort of like that idea that, you know, if you wanted to dig a bit further into this series, you could go to this website and get pulled into different themes of waiting. So that's quite new for me in terms of the structure of a final project, because a lot of the work has related very directly to the images, whereas this text doesn't at all. It doesn't reference any of my photographs.
And how is the money for this kind of work? Because I know you finance a lot of this through grants. Yeah. Is that a possible way? How? Because it's expensive. It's expensive living in other countries. It's expensive, like, doing the sort of work that you do.
Well, I mean, actually, you know, the reason I lived in Cairo is so I could work in Cairo. So actually life became so much cheaper. I wasn't flying in and out of Cairo to do the work. So for 5 years, my life was actually, I was able to funnel a much smaller chunk of my own money into my projects because my life was there. You know, Tales from the City of Gold, where I was looking at the mine dumps of Johannesburg, I could see mine dumps out of my bedroom window. You know, so it was like, that was an amazing advantage to have, and a great position. Waiting was an idea that I developed at the end of my stay in Johannesburg, so being back in London with my wife, I then had to find funding to be able to go back out to make, you know, the flights, and you have to hotels and things like that if you don't live there anymore. So no, it is a struggle. You know, there's pros and cons from that situation where you have to really think through what is it you're doing, what do you want to achieve, you know, how are you going to do this, and when you've got grants, you've obviously responsibilities, and there's, you know, this has to be made by this point in time for this festival and whatnot. So there's, again, pros and cons to having deadlines as an individual that does my own work. You know, Tales from the City of Gold, I spent 3.5 years making. And, you know, I know some photographers that just carry on for years and years and years. So, yeah, whether it's a reality to support my family on grants, you know, that's a harder thing to kind of weigh up, but that's why I still work with magazine commissions and, yeah, you know, selling prints, and I have multiple kind of fingers in different parts now.
But your commissioned work, as I said earlier, also looks a lot like your personal work, so you obviously can keep your integrity in that work also. So that's...
You don't see everything I do.
Oh,
yeah, no, like, of course there's some things that someone says, this is what we do, we want this, and you're like, okay, it's a day's work, I'll go do it. But yeah, for the most part, you know, people seem now scared to approach me about things because they worry that I'll only do what I do.
Okay.
And you know, that would be a great position to be in, but that's not a reality in a world that's, you know, becoming more and more competitive and sort of shrinking more and more in terms of the output. That's wrong, actually. There's more and more outputs for photography. It's harder and harder to monetize those outputs. I think that's the reality.
Oh, we'll have to talk about that. But perhaps you should get one of your images from waiting, so we'll see them the entire time. Because that's something I have thought about, is that I have some problems sometimes with the internet, because it's such a hastily way of watching images. Sometimes I know it's perhaps a strange thought. I think that I wish I could only see these